Call the meeting to order. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and welcome to the January 11th business meeting of the Milford Board of Education. For the record, Mrs. Griffin, can you please note that Dr. Gregory is participating remotely. She was called out of town on a family emergency. First order of business, we have a replacement to announce for the first district vacancy. Mr. Walter Hagedorn of Judith Drive will be has been nominated by the first district to serve the unexpired term in the first district. And I remember Mr. Hagedorn from many years ago. He lived in my neighborhood. You have 2 children, right?
Yes.
And 1.5 grandchildren?
One and
one on the way, right? Nice. Any day, nice. So we'll have a motion, Ms. Tobias.
Okay, I make a motion that the Board of Education approves Mr. Walter Hagedorn to replace the recent vacancy in the first district and serve the remainder of the term.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Jagodzinski seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And, oh, I'm sorry, we have to do a roll call because Dr. Gregory is on remote. Thank you for reminding me. Remote roll call, please.
Claire Casey?
Here.
Michael DeGrego?
Yep.
Yes, yes or no?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Suzanne Tobias?
Yes.
Jennifer Federico is not here yet. Jess Gregory?
Yes.
Tom Jagodzinski?
Yes.
Susan Krasinski?
Yes.
Earl Whiskeyman?
Yes.
Susan Glennon?
Yes. So it's 8-0. Okay, motion carries unanimously. And we have our city clerk here this evening, Mrs. Roerig, to swear Mr. Hagedorn in so that he may join us immediately.
Good. You can come up here.
Okay.
If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or sincerely affirm that you will uphold your duties and responsibilities to the best of your ability as a member of the Board of Education for the City of Milford? So help you God, under the pain of penalty for perjury or false statement.
Yes, I do.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
And then we have a seat for you right here. Your nameplate is on order. We apologize.
Yes, I got the email earlier.
Very good. So we will work really hard to get you up to speed quickly, okay? We move on to student and staff recognition. Dr. Fieser.
Thank you, Mrs. Glennon. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope everyone had good and safe holidays and are rested as we now launch this new, not school year, since we're halfway through, but the new year. And no snow again, so that's good. But Mr. Hagedorn, we welcome you to the Board of Education.
Thank you very much.
First time we're meeting, so again, delighted that you're here. And it gives me great honor this evening to begin with a community service recognition, and I would like to call up a 5th grader from Captain Middle School, Andrew Thompson. Andrew, come on up. Oh, I'm going to talk about you for a little bit. So, before I talk about Andrew, I also want to say that I know his principal, Mrs. Thedigan, is here.
Good evening.
Which is great, and his parents are also here. So annually, our district participates in fundraising efforts for the United Way. During the 6 weeks period of fundraising that we hold in the school, teachers, staff, and students from the district are very actively involved. It's not every day that an 11-year-old will give up the money in his savings account to be donated toward a charitable cause. However, that's exactly what Andrew Thompson, a 5th grader at Cap Penn Middle School, did. He heard a commercial created by the Cap Penn Middle TV crew being played on the morning announcements regarding the United Way. Andrew must have really been listening hard and paying attention to the morning announcements, that everyone would do that, as he brought in, subsequent to the announcement, $122 of his own personal savings to be donated to the United Way campaign. One day he came into school with a huge Ziploc bag filled with coins. While holding the bag, he enthusiastically told his classroom teacher, Mrs. Rogers, "I wanted to do something special with it." Donating his money to the United Way was Andrew's way of doing something very special. Mrs. Rogers contacted Andrew's parents to let them know that he had come in with this money for a donation and make sure his parents were aware of this and that this was something that he really wanted to do. And without a doubt, his parents said, absolutely, this was Andrew's decision. It was his choice to do this. His compassion and generosity are clearly amazing for someone so young. So we want to thank you, Andrew. Your unselfish attitude speaks loud and clear of your genuine character. You're a role model for every one of us here in this room. And we are just so appreciative and just want to commend you for what you did. So I'm going
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent job. Thank you.
Congratulations. Great job. Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Andrew, you may not know this, but also there's someone very important from United Way here this evening that you're going to have an opportunity to meet. I'd like to now call up Gary Johnson, who's the president and CEO of United Way of Milford. Come on, Andrew. You can meet Mr. Johnson. We're going to recognize Mr. Johnson as well this evening. So you just heard the Milford Public Schools, including all of the staff, students, and families in our community, have been vibrant supporters of United Way's annual campaign appeal. The work of United Way is seen by nearly all of us, whether in the form of helping fund the good works of the Boys and Girls Club, the Milford Literacy Center, the Bethel Center, Bridges, Kids Counts, and many, many more organizations and agencies in town, as well as assisting families who are struggling by helping with heating, food, mental health, and much, much more. Probably the most visible action taken by the United Way in recent years was seen during Superstorm Sandy and the subsequent record-setting snowstorms we encountered. The United Way was deeply involved in helping families who were in need of emergency shelter, assistance with heating problems, and working to help relocate those who were displaced, and we had many families who were displaced. We salute the good works of the United Way and hope to continue to be strong partners in their work. That said, I'm pleased tonight to introduce Gary Johnson, the President and Chief Executive Officer of United Way of Milford. It's no secret, any of you that know Gary, he is really a major driver in this community. As the CEO of United Way, he can be seen everywhere. On an average day, Gary is in multiple places. His passion for creating an environment in our community where assistance is available for those who need it is unsurpassed. We in the school system have enjoyed a long positive relationship with Gary and the United Way. And tonight we brought in Gary to present him with some assistance. Gary, it's my honor and privilege and my great pleasure to present on behalf of the entire Milford Public School community a check in the amount of $39,046.80, which was raised by the schools. That's great. Thanks very much. In closing, I'd like also to note that for the past 5-year period, the Milford Public Schools collectively have contributed just under $173,000 to United Way, and we will continue to support the fund for many years into the future. So we really thank you, Gary, because we know our students and our families benefit tremendously from all of the services provided through United Way. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate this recognition. You know, we're out there during the course of the fall, especially raising the money, but the best part of the job I have is seeing the results of that money that is raised, and whether it's the counseling provided by Bridges and Catholic Charities, the scouting programs for our youth with Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Visiting Nurse Association, so many other agencies that many of you are familiar with. The results that they show, the work that they do, the services they provide to the people in our community, many of whom are families that many of you work with day in and day out during the course of the year. That's really the bottom line, the fact that so many people in this community are helped through a variety of services because of all of you, because of your contributions. So I thank you all, and this really means a lot. The school system has just been phenomenal, and we appreciate your support. We really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your service. Thank you.
Great job, guys. Great job.
I'm going to take your check, Gary.
Don't forget your note.
Is that it, Dr. Fieser, this evening?
Yes, it is. Thank
Okay,
you.
very good, thank you. So now we move on to student reports. I believe Jonathan Law reports first tonight, so I'd like to step forward.
Good evening. My name is Ian Hugo. This is James McCullough. Tonight we'll be filling in for David Patrick and Lee Carroll, who unfortunately cannot be here, but we're very excited. So I'll start off reading first with the academics. Midterms begin this week at law, starting Wednesday, January 13th, until Monday, January 18th. Congratulations to our very own Nisa Sastry, who was accepted to Yale University recently. And NWE testing will begin on January 29th for all freshmen and sophomore students at law. And moving on to athletics, congratulations to our girls basketball team who hosted and won their Holiday Classic tournament with Berlin, Immaculate, and Foreign. The Milford Indians ice hockey team hosted a junior varsity tournament on December 30th and 31st with Guilford Hand and Cheshire. The boys basketball team will be playing next Monday against Daniel Hand of Madison at the Harbor Yard Arena at 3 p.m. Congratulations to junior Matt Zansowitz and senior Alyssa Palladino for winning Scholar Athlete of the Month. And Joe Corey, Logan Danville, and David Patrick will be receiving their awards tonight for All Conference at the All SEC banquet, which is why David couldn't be here.
This month in Guidance. Guidance will be hosting a junior parent night, January 21st, to start preparing them for the college processes. Holly Frankwit from the College Place, Connecticut, will be at law on 3 days to meet with the parents individually and help them complete the FAFSA. And college selection will begin the first week of February. Some other stuff going on at law this month. Key Club is collecting school supplies for the Children of Peace to be sent to Vietnam schools. They also conducted a holiday food drive and prepared 10 holiday meals to local families in need. Lastly, they helped raise over $3,000 for the Salvation Army. And that's it.
Thank you. Thanks for filling in.
Anytime.
And Foreign?
Good evening. In academics news, the sports and entertainment and marketing classes were treated to a visit to the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. They visited with Vice President of Sales and Marketing Jason Fidler, who gave the students tips on how to be employed within the sports industry through internships and networking. They made the students feel like VIPs, offering personal tours if requested. The students all came away with good memories of the trip to the Hall of Fame. In sports news, 10 members of the Milford Combined High School fencing team competed against Greens Farms Academy, Greenwich High, and Bridgeport in the first tournament of the season this past Saturday in Westport. Under foreign captain Amanda Shaw and law captain Madeline Rouser, the Lady Griffins went down 4-5 at a close match over Bridgeport over 18 bouts. For the men, freshman Sumant Kandapali led his Epi squad to a hard-fought 5-4 victory over Greens Farms, and foreign captain Andrew Hiza and sophomore saber fencer Mateo Menta took 2 bouts each.
In guidance, 70% of the class of 2016 have applied to 1 or more colleges. Students are continuing to hear back from schools, including acceptances from Towson, Drexel, Fordham, Villanova, George Mason, and Yale. The school counseling website currently has 23 scholarships, with more being added as we receive them. Students are encouraged to check the website for updated listings. January's Career of the Month is health and medical related careers. Students have the opportunity to sign up to listen to guest speakers on January 22nd in the Media Center. This past Friday, Bourne had their winter pep rally. Unified Sports' 3rd annual basketball tournament was held on Thursday, January 14th at 3 p.m. Wait, that's coming up. January 14th at 3 p.m. in the Bourne Gymnasium. Bourne is hosting the annual citywide fair on Thursday, March 31st in the gymnasium from 7 to 9. On Friday, December 18th, professionals in the field of psychology came to discuss their current jobs, past experiences, and education needed for their career. And then just great job to all the members of the Foreign Jazz Ensemble, concert band, concert choir, advanced vocal ensemble, and strings orchestra who performed at the winter concert on Tuesday evening on December 15th. The concert was enjoyed by all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move on to public comment. I'll read the public comment statement. Speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about the Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with Milford Public Schools. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted. Consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Please be advised, our meetings are televised live on Channel 28 on Cablevision. Limit your comments to 3 minutes, and please state your name and address before speaking. Is there anybody who'd like to address the board tonight for public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Chair's report. Before I do that, if anybody would like to go home and do your homework, you feel free to be on your way now. All right, so Chair's report, I only have a couple of items. We had some brief conversation at the last meeting regarding a preschool, potential of a preschool workshop. We had one in May of 2014. And when I went back and looked at my notes, I see that we did at that time indicate a couple of items that should be looked at 3 to 5 years out. So, you know, coming up sometime in this term, we will schedule another workshop on preschool with Dr. Fieser. We'll have her work it into the calendar. Another issue that came up was some questions about standards-based learning and the standards-based report card. So I just wanted to know from board members if the majority of us feel that that's another topic that we can consider planning a workshop COW meeting on. Is there anybody that would, doesn't think it's a good idea? Otherwise, we'll move, I'll have Dr. Fieser put that on the calendar as well. That's fine.
I think there are specific problems, whether or not we need an entire workshop on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think generally that's one of the issues that it's a school-based issue, so it's something that Dr. Fieser and her staff administration would make decisions on regarding implementation. So it would behoove us first to have an understanding of what it is, I think, before we start to give our input. So if we'll talk further at leadership about scheduling those two things for a workshop coming up at some point. Okay? Yes, Mr. Whiskeyman.
Just where possible,
We generally try to incorporate those workshops within our committee of the whole meetings.
Correct, yep, so they would be done as a cow meeting,
As
yeah.
opposed to a separate.
Correct, yep.
Additional meeting.
Yeah.
I was going to ask the same.
Yes,
just to
it would be,
clarify.
yeah, we would try to work it in as a cow meeting, yeah. Okay, we also need to be scheduling, we've been talking a little bit in leadership about a retreat. We expect probably in early March we'll have something lined up. Typically we do that on a Saturday, but more information on that will be forthcoming. I wanted to let you know that the Board of Finance public hearing on our budget will be held on February 3rd over across the street, and so that's the public hearing for the public. And then administration and myself will be presenting the budget to the Board of Finance on the 17th, Wednesday the 17th of February at 6:30. I think they meet in conference room B, I believe. So that'll be just a month away.
So, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to clarify, the public hearing is when the public comments?
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yep. And that's all I had. Liaison reports, are there any liaison reports? Mr. Krasinski?
Thursday night, Mrs. Federico and I were at the school facilities building committee meeting. We discussed the commissioning for East Shore Middle School for their HVAC system. That seems to be working well. They've got a 35-page report. The contractor has gone through it and has corrected most of the items. Once he's finished, he'll turn it over to the architects and engineers. They'll double check it. There's only one item that they can't do anything with right now because it needs to be warmer for them to look at the dehumidification. So they figure in a month and a half, they'll be 100% complete with that one exception. We also talked about West Shore Middle School, which we'll be hearing a presentation on that, so I won't go into detail on that. And Antonazzi Associates gave a report on doing roofing for four elementary schools and Harborside Middle School over the summer.
That's it. Thank you. Other liaison reports? Okay. We'll move on then to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mrs. Glennon. So we're going to begin this evening with the proposed budget for 2016-17. So we have copies of the PowerPoint that are being shared with the board, and we also have copies for the public.
Here. I don't know what we can do about that. Can what? He's just getting, ruffling of papers, you mean? Yeah. Okay.
So good evening, everyone. I'm excited for the opportunity to be able to speak to you about the proposed budget for 2016-17. So I would ask you to take a look at this opening slide, which represents different children across, obviously, the nation and the globe, but with respect to us. You know, we service strugglers, we service advanced students, we service dreamers, we service children who are ready to finish with us and soar. So I just thought it was an appropriate way to frame this evening's budget. So a question that one might ask is, what does a school budget tell us? A budget, in my mind, expresses what is valued in the schools. It expresses what is really important in the schools. And we're hoping to be able to underscore that as we move through this presentation. A quote from Ben Franklin, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest, and we feel that the investment that we're proposing will certainly have some payoffs for us as we continue forward in the school system. Our primary theme this year is to sustain and to strengthen all of the work that we've engaged in over the last 4 years, and I want to underscore that. With the support of the Board of Education, the Board of Aldermen, and the city, over the last 4 years, we have been able to do inordinate things in this district and really, I believe, move the system forward. And we're really grateful for all the support that we've received. And what we now want to do is to really put our energies into sustaining that work and deepen it and improve our practices so that we really can further impact upon student learning. So you'll see that theme as we move through, and therefore when we talk about sustaining and strengthening, we're not talking about lots and lots and lots of requests, because what we really want to do is to take what we have and make it even that much better. Your support made this possible. And so just take a minute to take a look at what's listed there from the elementary configuration, which is the most recent, to, again, whether it's more advanced placement courses or additional pre-K classrooms or the departmentalization in grades 4 and 5 this year. I mean, the list could go on and on. And again, it's because of your support and the support of the city. The instructional supports that have been provided, and also furniture and equipment and technology, et cetera, has just been, again, it has been so much, and we are just so grateful for what has been given to us over the last 4 years. So your support made these kinds of things possible for our kids. And you see the technology, and you see on the right-hand bottom is an example of our departmentalization, and to the left were kindergarten kids who were involved in writing, and they came and shared their stories. And over to the left, not quite sure, but one of our new playgrounds that exists within our schools. Again, the support that's been given. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So again, we want to sustain and strengthen. So when we developed this budget, that was our goal. And with that goal, we are asking for very little. We have increased the budget by a 0.835%, which is the lowest increase in more than 10 years that's been proposed by the superintendent. And again, it's modest requests that we're going to make, but it's because our focus is going to be really making better what we've been engaged in for the last 4 years. Just to give you an idea of the proposed budgets that have come forth from superintendents in the last, this is actually 12 years, and you can see that the one for 16-17 is by far the lowest in the last dozen years. We are making modest requests in this budget. The first request that we are making is we are asking to be able to establish a pre-K half-day program at Pumpkin Delight School. It would involve 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. We want this pre-K program at Pumpkin because we know that our neediest population exist at Pumpkin Delight, and we really feel that this kind of program could really help many of our children who would be then entering into kindergarten beyond the pre-K. And it would help them with their literacy, with their numeracy, with their socialization, etc., in ways that could just benefit them tremendously as they then begin formally their schooling as kindergartners. Our funding is going to be from our existing special education pre-K program tuitions, and as a result, there is going to be no impact on the budget with this request. No impact. We don't need to cover the costs of staffing this first year, nor the cost of instructional supplies, nor the cost of any furniture or other kinds of supports. It all will be able to be covered through the pre-K tuitions, pre-K program tuitions for this first year.
Dr. Fieser, I find this misleading because, in fact, it does impact the budget. Now, there's an offset, but it's just the statement that there's no budget impact. I don't think is appropriate.
Well, what I would say to you is that the, and maybe you could help me here, is that the tuitions.
We'll cover it, I understand that.
Correct. So with respect to the overall budget amount that, you know, for example, the adopted budget last year, the budget that we're proposing this year, it is not impacting that budget. Are we using monies that have come into the system in terms of tuitions?
It does
Yes.
affect the bottom line.
No, it does not affect the bottom line.
Not in the general budget.
In the expense budget, it does.
No, you won't see anything in the general budget, the document that's before us and that we'll be undertaking the workshops and everything else. There's nothing in there for any costs of this program. There were the current pre-K program that is administered by the PPS department,
right,
collects fees for the typical children that are in that program.
Right.
And there are enough fees that have been carried over to fund this program at least for the first year. And we're looking at it as, you know, let's look at it this year, let's evaluate it, and then see where we go in the future.
But aren't these school employees?
They are.
But they are not included in the school budget?
Correct. Yep, they'll be paid by the pre-K. We have other employees that are paid for through fees, like the before and after care program that's at John F. Kennedy and Pumpkin Delight. That's a standalone program that all of the employees of that program are paid for that program. The food service department is self-sustaining. It stands on its own. You won't see a dollar in the budget pertaining to the food service program.
A check is being cut for an employee's salary.
Correct.
Where is that accounted for?
The student activities accounts, which are audited just like all other accounts, but it's a standalone account. Now, and I'll equate it to, and I'm not sure how far we want to go into this,
Yeah,
because that's what the workshops are for.
We could perhaps, that is what the workshops are for. This is Dr. Fieser's presentation. If we can allow her to make her presentation, and we have 3 days scheduled to be discussing the budget itself.
Yeah, and we can, and just to kind of close off this part, when we had the board orientation, as part of my presentation, I pointed out to you that there's the general funds, and then there are student activity accounts for any number of things. You know, all of the sports teams have a student activities account, but there are standalone accounts, just like in the city. We'll just one account, the health insurance account, the self-insured self-insurance account. That's not within the general budget. It's a special service fund that's outside the general fund, but it still has to withstand all of the accounting and financial practices, including being audited.
Okay.
In some cases, those student activities accounts are more scrutinized than the general budget is.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. So, so again, we would like this to be at Pumpkin Delight, and we really feel it could make a difference with respect to a group of children. And we're asking for it to be a half-day program, because with a half-day program, we would actually be able to service more children. We're anticipating we would be able to service, for example, 35 children with, you know, a group coming in the morning and a group coming in the afternoon. If it was a full-day program, we would really be able to only service probably half that number. And so that's why we would like it to be a half-day. Our second request is tied to a career pathway that we would like to launch for September. If you recall, those of you that were on the board, when the whole long-range planning process ended and the decision was made to move forward with the redistricting and the reconfiguration, one of the things the board asked us to do is to create career pathways. You actually asked us to create 2 of them for September, but we're really comfortable with creating 1 for September and know we can do a really fine job with that, and we would like to then create the second one for the following year. So the career pathway that we've chosen for the first one, which would be unveiled in both the middle school and high school simultaneously so that kids would move up in a pathway, middle through high, is in computer science. And the middle school would have robotics and/or coding beginning next year. And the high school in grades 9 or 10th graders can also take it, would have an introduction to computer science. And then as we would add courses the following year, each year following, so that you would have a pathway up through 12th grade. But you can see in the arrow that's there, after introduction to computer science, that, you know, there is the option for students to take robotics in much more depth. There's robotics 1, and then there's a level 2. They could take computers, electronics, and programming. They also could take AP computer science. There may be other courses. And then in grade 12, the expectation is that students would do some kind of a capstone project, since this is a whole career-oriented pathway itself. So we're asking to be able for support for this, but the truth is, the support that we need is very minimal. We need instructional materials. We're thinking about $4,500 is all we need. And that would be for the middle school piece. The high school, we feel very confident that we're okay there. And then with respect to staffing, we really believe we can redeploy a staff member to do the teaching, whatever is going to be required at the middle school level, and the same way at the high school level, with no impact on staffing. So we're not asking for additional staff. What we really believe is that we can capture it through redeployment within the existing staffing that we have. Other things under student learning that we're asking for, we would like to install a language lab at East Shore Middle School. We have one at West Shore, which was put into place, I believe, a year ago. Is that correct, Dr. Barbero, that went to West Shore a year ago? Yes. This is the second year? Yes. So we would like to place it in East Shore for this next year, and then follow up with Harborside, hopefully the following year. The cost of the lab is $36,500. These labs, if you took world language when you were in high school many years ago, for me, the kind of lab we're talking about is certainly very different than what we see right now in these new labs. We have them in the high school. This would be putting a comparable lab into the middle schools, and they are very sophisticated, computerized technology that enables students to do all kinds of things. The old labs, it was, you know, the teacher spoke to you, you spoke to the teacher. I mean, it was a very linear, you know, teacher-directed kind of experience. This, students will be able to work in groups. The teacher can differentiate assignments based upon, you know, how well kids are doing in a class. So a group of kids who are really advanced could do something different in the lab than, you know, the students who are maybe struggling. There are kids who may be doing a particular project. Kids are actually able to save whether they're doing, whether it's a project, whether it's, you know, practicing conversation, etc. They can save all of the work that they do in the lab so that they can actually see and hear their progression as it moves through the year. This is also the kind of lab, if students are in advanced classes at the high school, so if they're taking an advanced placement language class, their exam is in this lab. It's not a pencil and paper test for the language lab. So what this will enable kids to do, whether they're taking 2 years of a language, 3 years of a language, or they want to move up through advanced placement, the lab experience in middle school will enable kids to be that much stronger as they move into high school. So we really think it's going to, we know it's going to enhance the learning of kids We're seeing it in West Shore as we speak, so. We're also, we're not asking for money for this, but we want to declare that where we really want to focus our curriculum work next year is around the core areas, to complete the core areas of English language arts, math, science, and social studies, the curriculum and the assessments. And when I talk about completing, again, I want to refresh people's memories that when the Connecticut core standards were adopted, there were massive changes that were required in curricular across the board, but particularly the core areas. And so we're really nearing to kind of finishing, I say that with a small f because you never finish curriculum writing, but finishing those areas. And so that's really where we want to put our energies. But what we are doing is we're earmarking monies in the existing budget that would go toward that. But that's a priority for us. This is part of, again, sustaining the work. And then the following year, we're going to go on a what's called a curriculum cycle. And so there would be maybe 1 or 2 areas each year that would be, or 3 areas, depending upon the size of the departments, that would be the focus of curriculum writing moving forward. We also really want to research and to begin the development of a social-emotional curriculum. We're long overdue for this. We know that the need is great in our system, but also, quite frankly, across the state and across the nation. And there's lots of good work that's being done, across the country around this. And what we want to do is to have a consistent pre-K through grade 12 social-emotional curriculum that would be in place over the next couple of years. And lastly, what we're asking for is $25,000 to support the NEASC accreditation process for Law High School, which is scheduled to take place in the fall of 2016. For those of you that are not familiar with the accreditation process, a visiting team of maybe about 15 Connecticut educators will be coming to Milford. They arrive on a Sunday, they leave on Wednesday. So they spend from Sunday through Wednesday. Most of the time is spent in the high school, in classes, meeting with groups of teachers, departments, examining school improvement plans, examining the work that teachers have engaged in, et cetera, all with the idea of moving toward accreditation. A report is subsequently written by the chair of that committee, which the school probably receives its notification, I want to say maybe 6 months or 8 months later. But that's the whole process, and so we have to house or put up in a hotel the visiting team and obviously provide meals for them for the entire time that they're here.
Dr. Fiesa?
It's the spring of 2017. Did I mess up? 16, 17. Spring of 2017. Sorry about that.
Dr.
Can we allow her to
No.
finish the presentation and ask the questions at the end, please? Can she finish her presentation?
I prefer to do it this way, but...
Dr. Fieser, would you like to continue your presentation?
If it's not going to take us for long, I'll be glad to, if that's okay.
No, I was just wondering why an item like social and emotional curriculum would be included in a budget presentation, since it has no budget implications.
Because it's part of our priorities, and we wanted to say that this is, that the money's in curriculum, 2 areas in which we wanted to go toward, and we wanted to just let the board know these are part of our priorities. So in the past, we've literally asked for additional monies in curriculum and designated it. We're not asking for additional monies, but we are saying these are where our priorities are. So that's why we included it.
Okay. My concern is that in approving the budget, we're in effect approving social and emotional curriculum, which I don't think that you're going to provide us with enough information for us to be able to do that. And since it doesn't have any budget implication, I question whether it should be included in the budget.
And yeah, I respect what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. So those are our student learning requests. We also have one security and climate request. We would like an additional school resource officer. This would be for the middle school. Just to refresh everybody's memory, currently we have 4 school resource officers, 1 for each high school, and then 2 in the middle schools. One of the 2 is primarily at West Shore, but spends about 20% of his time at the academy. The other two are split between Harborside and East Shore. So we're asking for another officer to enable each middle school to have a school resource officer. And the cost is $40,000, which is actually half the cost. When we first brought school resource officers on board, the agreement was that we would pay 50% of the cost and the police department would pick up 50%. So this is the cost, the half that we would pay. Two other drivers with respect to our request. One is additional buses. The board, previous board, voted to change the policy for walkers in the school system, actually reducing the walking distance. There will be more buses that will be needed to transport these students, so $280,000 is the anticipated amount that it may cost. And then natural gas, we are requesting $181,417, and the reason for that, to be totally honest, is our natural gas cost actually went up significantly last year. We were notified by the city of an increase of nearly 30% increase in gas last year, and we erred in not putting it in the budget. So this amount is reflecting what we anticipate will be the cost of natural gas next year in our budget. And we can talk in more detail about that, but I know the question that's going to be asked is, well, from 2 years ago, you know, the gas has gone down, et cetera. We will be going out to bid, from what I understand, is that, well, we're part of a, not a natural gas, sorry about that. Gasoline versus natural gas, sorry about that confusion. So that's, those are the other drivers for our budget. So if we looked at our total requests amount to a little more than $500,000, and they're listed here. We sought major savings in our budget, and we were very successful, we believe, in finding the savings. So I'm going to take you through those. The first savings were from the elementary reconfiguration. Those of you that were involved in this a year ago remember that there were a significant, almost $500,000 of one-time costs as part of the elementary reconfiguration. And we underscored in our budget a year ago that these were one-time costs and that we committed to making sure that we reduced the budget this year by those costs. So you will see the first set of savings are these one-time costs, which amount to $427,500. This is literally the amounts that were put into the budget last year specific to the elementary reconfiguration by category, and the amounts that the board had approved, and so these amounts are being reduced from the current budget. In addition, we have certified staff reductions, but let me just say to you, just because there's a little bit there's a bit of a complication here. Before I get into the reductions, let me just explain that when the board adopted its budget at the end of for July 1, it adopted it with a certain amount of staffing. From that point, we actually had to add 5.1 teachers from the time that the board adopted the current budget. And what you see are the 5 teachers that we added since the board adopted its budget. 2.4 high school teachers, and you can see they went into Spanish, science, and co-taught English. 0.7 tech ed teachers. We didn't actually add. We added only a 0.2, but 0.5 was moved off of a state grant. For years, we had part of our tech ed teachers on a grant, and this year the state reduced monies and basically said you need to move off the grant, the teacher that you had there. So that's where the 0.5 came from. And then we had 1.2 elementary specialists added. This was in music and physical education. Those of you that were on the budget last spring remember that Mr. Cummings said at that time he thought maybe there would be a need for additional specialists. Well, as it turned out, that's exactly the case. Music and phys ed, 1.2 that were spread across the 8 elementary schools. And then also a 0.8 middle school health position we thought we were going to be able to reduce in the budget this year. And as it turned out, we never saw that realized. So that 0.8 had been reduced, but we had to add it back in because we really never were able to remove that position. So before I talk about actual reductions, you need to know that we added 5.1 positions to the budget after the board adopted the 2015-16 budget. So so here's the proposed reductions. We'll just hold on to that 5.1 additions. These are the reductions. We are proposing 11 reductions from the budget. 11 teachers, these are regular ed teachers. I want to tell you straight out that of the 11 teachers, 2 of them are ready to learn. Their positions are being removed from the budget because they are going to be paid by ready-to-learn tuition, but they actually will continue to work in the school system. So it's similar to the issue that you raised before. So 11 positions, teacher positions, are being removed from the general funds, but in actuality it's 9 positions because 2 of them are ready to learn that will be picked up through the ready-to-learn tuitions. And then in addition, there's 3.5 special education professional staff. One of those is a teacher of the deaf, because next year we will no longer need that teacher to service any of our children in our schools. So the total reductions from the general funds are 14.5 FTE. But we have to take into account the 5.1 that were added. So if we reduce 14.5, but then we have to add the 5.1 back in that were added since the adopted budget, the net staff reductions is 9.4, and the approximate savings will be $587,000. Okay. Instructional support reductions. We looked at all of these categories and found areas to reduce $549,102 out of, and you can see the list there from instructional supplies all the way down to technology. What I do want to underscore is in the 3 areas of instructional supplies, periodicals, and professional development. Those amounts, actually it's library books, I'm sorry, instructional supplies, library books, and professional development, those amounts are over and above what we already reduced in the one-time cost tied to the elementary reconfiguration. So I don't want you to think that we're, repeating twice. These are dollars over and above in those 3 categories, what you already saw in the tied to the reconfiguration. So this is $549,000 in instructional support reductions. We're also reducing $26,000 in non-instructional supplies, and in capital equipment, almost $85,000. That capital equipment line primarily purchases vehicles. And last year we purchased 3 vehicles, and this year we're requesting 1 vehicle. So that's part of why we're able to reduce. So the total major savings that we have captured in the existing budget is $1,600,000, and you can see again the reconfiguration, our staff reductions, our instructional support, and then the other, which includes non-instructional supplies and capital equipment. So we feel really, quite frankly, we feel really proud of the work that we did around this because we really, really looked for where could we find savings. And what I want to say publicly is, while this may look like, holy cow, look at how much was reduced, we are confident that we are not impacting upon student learning in any way through these reductions. We were careful about that, but we also said, again, going back to our theme, that we want to sustain the work that we're doing. We're not looking to add a whole lot on. And we really felt, because of all the support that we received, that we actually were able to reduce in a number of areas. So once again, as I've indicated, we're grateful for all the support. We were strategic in how we went about this whole process, and our goal moving forward, you know, is to sustain and strengthen. If we don't sustain the work, then it's for naught. And so that's really what our priority is. And so I end with a picture. These are children in a social studies class in, I think, grade 4 in one of our schools. And this is one of the examples of, again, what we've been supported in, which is the departmentalization of the core areas at the elementary level. So with that, I will just say thank you. It's supposed to say, and ask you if there's any questions. We'd be more than happy to answer them.
So keeping in mind, board members, that we've been collecting written questions that we'll go over during the workshops over the next few days. But are there any questions on Dr. Feaser's presentation at this time? Ms. Federico?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one quick question I'll ask tonight. I have a few more complex questions that I'll submit in writing. But before I do that, I just want to commend you on these cuts. On being responsible enough to make these cuts on the instructional supports. And I appreciate that there will be no impact to the learning by making these cuts. But, you know, so many times I've seen people who are doing budgets and the natural inclination is just to roll the numbers over. And these are numbers in areas where people could just, you know, roll over, same as last year, and you did the hard work, and you looked at it, and you thought about what you really needed. And I just think that's tremendous. It's over $600,000 in savings to the Milford taxpayers, and I think it's very responsible and very reasonable. So I want to thank you for that. My quick question is on the SROs. If there are 3 SROs, and there is one for each middle school, would one of those still spend 20% of their time at the academy?
That's our assumption. I mean, we would work with the police department, but that's our assumption, is that's the case.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's it for now.
Other questions on Dr. Feaser's presentation?
I just have a general comment, 2 general comments. One, I really appreciate the type of budget you submit. I think that your budgets over the years have been very financially responsible, and I think, you know, it's very difficult to complain about a 0.8% increase in the budget. My broader concern is the inclusion of the computer science career pathway and the social emotional curriculum in the budget. I think that if items like this are going to be discussed, they really should be discussed prior to the budget process, because they're major changes in what we're doing. And in the case of these 2 things, actually, they have either no or minimal budget impact. And I question whether they're appropriately handled within the budget context. I'm broadly concerned that we approve very vague things like we're going to do some career pathways. And then this is then taken as a, you know, a license to proceed. And I'm not criticizing you, I'm criticizing the board. I think that, you know, the board really ought to get a presentation that covers, for example, on computers pathways, you know, what's the scope of this thing? How much is it going to cost now, and how much is it going to cost in the future? What are the objectives? What's the implementation plan? How do we measure success? What's going to be the impact on other areas? So that the board can, you know, act on, you know, detailed information rather than these vague statements. I also think for the board, most boards of education have curriculum committees, and we have the committee of the whole, and I don't think we're doing as much as we should in terms of looking at the curriculum and the proposed curriculum changes. So I think that the board needs to look at that going forward. How are we going to handle curriculum issues?
Okay.
Okay, that's,
May I respond?
Sure.
Mr. Jagodinski, I really appreciate the question that you've asked. What I can say to you is that we have much more in place for the career pathway than what I described.
right.
If it's, what I'd like to do, if that's a question, is that at one of the workshops that I'd like to ask is Justine LaSala, our supervisor of science and tech ed.
Right.
As well as Mr. Burt, to be able to talk about, because there are pieces actually in place already that, in the high school, that we then are in a position to be able to bring into the middle school.
Right.
There's been a lot of research that's been done around software programs. I'm looking for where Justine is. Yep. That could be used. The course for the, if my memory serves me correctly, for the junior year is in the process of being created and will be implemented for next year. Is that correct? My point is that we can provide you much more information.
Right.
Can we provide everything that you asked? No, and so it's a legitimate question. But I want you to know it's not as if all that we have is what I just put on paper.
Right.
There's much more already in place
Right.
that we know, we absolutely know we can move forward in September.
Right.
Do we know 3 years out exactly what it'll look like? No, it's a pathway, and generally, I'm not saying this is the right way, but when districts move in this direction, they build the first year, and then they build the second year, and then they build the third year. And that's precisely how we were proceeding.
Right, I'm not, my comment really is about more the way the board is handling it. And that the board is giving a general, okay, we're going to do this thing, which is vaguely defined. And that's really the last time the board is voting on it. And I think that, we ought to be reviewing the computer science career pathway. And we ought to say, yes, we're in agreement, and we ought to move forward on it. And when you have another pathway, we ought to review that, and we ought to say, yes, proceed on it. Rather than what's happening now, we, approve this vague thing, and then, it's included in the budget, and we're implying we're approving it, and, I just don't think that's appropriate for the board.
So if I could comment on that, that has been the board's, prior boards, their practice, and we delegate that as a day-to-day operations of the school that we delegate to administration. That's been the board's practice going.
I know, but we want to be much better than that.
Well, that's a board decision
Right.
as a whole. So
Right.
that would be, if this board as a whole wants to have more input on curriculum issues, it would be done as a committee of the whole, because that's what we are. But we would discuss that and make those decisions. For instance, it might be a topic for the retreat, that we would have
Right.
that conversation.
Yeah.
It would be a board decision. The 10 of us would decide that, how we want to
Right.
proceed going forward as this board
Sure.
with those issues. So we can.
Right, that's what I said, it was a board decision. And, I think that we need to reevaluate this committee of the whole situation. A newspaper reporter who had covered the board for a number of years said he became convinced that the committee of the whole was designed to prevent the board from doing anything significant.
Well, I don't agree with that, but
I
this is
understand.
a conversation outside the scope of the budget.
Right.
We really should save it for another day.
Right, like, yeah, I mean, you opened the discussion on the role of the board, so I
Well,
was
just
merely
saying
following
that
up
it
on
is
what you
something that
said.
we would take up at another time as a retreat or something of
Right.
that nature. It's a decision that the whole board needs,
Sure.
conversation and decision of the whole board that
Right.
needs to be.
And that's why I was brought up to the whole board.
Correct, so I'll make a note of it, thank you. A question on the
Just from the budget
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, I appreciate the details of both the new expenses that you are proposing and the savings. And when I first looked at it, my first impression was, gee, there's all these savings and not much new requested, so how come you're asking for any increase, 0.8%? And when I looked at some of the detail, I noticed that despite the fact that you have some FTE reductions, the total cost for salaries and benefits of the staff is more than it was the prior year. And that appears to be where the total increase is coming from. So I just wanted to confirm that my understanding is correct, that in fact, despite the fact that you have all these savings, we still need to pay everybody according to their contracts, and that drives the total increase forward. So that despite that, we can actually decrease the top line, we're still faced with even though it's a small increase in the budget.
I think that what needs to be underscored is that when we talk about increases, particularly in as far as, say, for example, teacher increases, it's not only the percent increase, it's also the step increase.
Well, I understand that, but these are according to contracts, so.
Absolutely.
So they're
That's
driven
right.
by the total number of staff, the contracts in place, et cetera. So they're really not something that we have a lot of control over. At this point in time, under this budget, we can always address those when it comes to negotiation times, but that's a separate issue. But I just want to make sure my understanding was correct.
That's correct.
Wages, benefits, and insurance.
Really
are
the
those
drivers
factors that
in terms
continue
of
to rise.
taking us forward.
Right.
Right.
And the
Okay.
reductions that we made go toward offsetting those. If we weren't making those reductions, the increase, the
Would be
requested increase would
substantially
be much higher.
more like 2 or 3%.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Other general questions for Dr. Feaser on her presentation? Okay,
If I
yes,
could,
yes, Dr. Gregory.
I just wanted to thank her for the work on the presentation and the questions I submitted. I look forward to discussing in our workshop.
Very good. Yes, so board members, if you have other questions, additional questions, if this presentation has garnered more questions, please make sure you send them along to me so I can submit them to administration so they can put together some answers. And then we'll start going over the details and the questions that have been submitted at the workshop on the workshops on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay? All right. Thank you, Dr. Feaser.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the West Shore Middle School project, and I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Riccitelli, who is also then going to introduce Mr. Silver.
The right page here. Okay. Good evening, Mrs. Glennon. Thank you, Dr. Feaser, members of the board. The board has asked for kind of an update as to the status of the West Shore Middle School expansion project. And so with us here tonight is Bill Silver. He's the principal of Silver Petroselli, who is is the city's permanent school facilities building committee design professional on this job. Also, of course, with us is Mr. Cavanna, the principal, and Mr. Hayes, the assistant principal, who have both been integral in this process. Before I turn it over to Bill for the actual presentation, I just wanted to go over in 3 to 5 minutes the capital improvement plan process. I've included a sheet in your package which just gives you the steps from start to finish. And I'm not going to go through each one, but I just want you to realize that the capital improvement plan is a 5-year projection of the needs, the long-term needs of the district over the next 5 years and beyond. And so each year, the Board of Education approves a capital improvement plan, which then gets sent on to the mayor. The mayor scrutinizes it and decides what he's going to put into the city's capital improvement plan. That then is sent to the Planning and Zoning Board for their input, and then is ultimately voted on by the Board of Aldermen. It's a plan. The important thing to remember with the CIP, and you'll see it when it comes to you, it used to be May. It says May here, but the mayor's time frame moved it up to March, so you'll be seeing it in March. There's no dollars associated with it. There are estimates that we put in place for the projects that are listed on there, but there's no dollars, and there's no dollars committed to it. That happens in the next piece of the process. When a project gets to the 5th year, or to the top of the list, the mayor then decides, what can the city afford, and decides whether that project is going to be included in his bond authorization requests. That traditionally happens in January to the Board of Finance, and early February to the Board of Aldermen. Once the mayor decides which projects are going to go forward, the Board of Finance and the Board of Aldermen vote on them. If they decide to fund the projects, then the projects in accordance with the state, Because once a project moves up, there is state reimbursement for school construction. And by the state guidelines, the city has to put together a building committee. And in Milford, Milford has created the Permanent School Facilities Building Committee, which is appointed by the Board of Aldermen. Obviously, you have 2 members from your board who are liaisons. There are 2 members from the Board of Aldermen. I'm sorry, you're not liaisons, you're full committee members. And 2 members of the Board of Aldermen, and then 3 members from the public at large. The Permanent School Facilities Building Committee then takes the project from start to finish, from doing RFPs and hiring the architects to making decisions on, with lots of input from a lot of different people, and you'll hear you know, how many different people and how many different groups have gone into the planning process on West Shore. But they take all of that input, but the Permanent School Committee has the final say in little things as the color of the floor tiles. I mean, that's sometimes the detail that it gets into. And then the Board of Education has a number of things according to the state reimbursement process that you need to do. And one of those is what's on your agenda tonight. You'll be asked to approve the education specifications. That's the first piece that we need in order to start the reimbursement process with the state. The first thing that we need from your board. Couple of months, you'll get the you'll get the specifications and the cost estimates, which you'll be asked to approve. And then at the end of the project, you'll be asked to approve the project as complete. That's the role of the Board of Education in this whole process. Again, it's all there. We can talk about it in more depth, but it just kind of gives you bullet points of where the process is. And you know, West Shore right now is, you know, at the second to bottom bullet point. Permanent Schools Facilities Committee is responsible for carrying out the project from start to finish, and that's where we are now. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Mr. Richitelli? May I ask a quick question? The document refers to the Planning and Zoning Board.
Yes.
The mayor goes to the Planning and Zoning Board or the Board of Finance?
No, the Planning and Zoning Board.
Okay.
The Planning and Zoning Board, there's a statute 8-24, thank you, that says that the capital improvement plan of the city has to be approved, get the input and approved by the Planning and Zoning Board before it goes to the governing body of the city. So they have to get it first.
And then the Board of Finance comes later?
In the bonding process. The Board of Finance does not vote on the capital improvement plan.
Okay, thank you.
One question. We haven't gone, the mayor hasn't approved yet, right? Is that where we still are? The mayor is going to go to the Board of Aldermen or the Board of Finance to get the funding approved?
Well, yes and no. The mayor already went through the process and bonded the money for the design process.
Okay.
So that money's already been funded at $1.5 million, plus financing costs, it's $1.65. And so that's how the architects were hired, and that's where it is. But yes, the mayor still has to approve construction dollars.
Okay.
And that is not going to take place in the January-February timeframe. The mayor's indicated that in this January-February timeframe, he's going to fund 4 elementary school roofs. But the West Shore project funding piece of it will come a little bit further down the road.
So I am Bill Silver.
Yep.
With Silver Petroselli and Associates. We're architects, engineers. We're based in Hamden. Many of you know us because we've been here before you, but we have 50 architects, engineers, and interior designers who really will play portions of work on this project. And so it's certainly a pleasure to review with you probably really the concepts and schematic design that have been prepared to date. We are only a third of the way, maybe a quarter of the way through the process, so there's a long way to go, so you're getting a preview. And I'll try to be brief. I have about as many as Dr. Fieser had in terms of slides, but I'll be very brief on them. I'll click through them quickly, and certainly please feel free to interrupt me, but I can also crank through it so that you have a glimpse of the whole picture, and then we can go back at any point if you'd like. Certainly in the early goals, which was part of the original capital funding, these were the ideas that we had. They were carryovers from the East Shore Middle School program that had just been finished, and certainly the educators looking at what the other middle schools had and what did West Shore need. And so certainly some of the important ones were the improving the arts program, but then also the simple infrastructure improvements that West Shore hasn't had since it was converted to a middle school in 1993, which includes the roofs, the boilers, the site improvements, and most importantly, almost as importantly, security upgrades. Things on window replacements, for instance, finally getting rid of all those insulated panels that you've seen proliferating our schools, and slowly but surely being changed over to window walls, energy efficient window wall systems. And even on the old 1950 portion in this building, the old two-story portion was built the same time as, geez, I just blanked out on it, Pumpkin Delight. It is the same generation, and so it has those large double-hung windows, and Pumpkin Delight, if you recall, was restored back to all those big expanses of natural light, and the same will happen here. We're also taking care of little small problems, like for instance in the courtyard, snow removal issues that just don't work well with the grade and the slopes that we do have, for instance, in this particular situation. To kick off the project after the building committee retained us, we essentially have had over 15 meetings with the educators and central office administrators, also the building committee, and part of those 15 meetings are really to gather information, gather their detailed program ideas. Like for instance, they came up with more elements that weren't necessarily in the overall capital budgeting, which is performance. They are a more performance-oriented school. They wanted a more significant stage rather than just a platform which exists there or really exists at the other schools as well. Changes in their special education that are occurring. Main office and its presence to the community, how small their main office is. Those are a lot of things that we took into consideration with what we call the program team. The program team is made up of core educators selected by the principal over there, and we work with them the most in these 15 meetings where we've interviewed departments right down to the nitty-gritty of science and language, arts, phys ed. As part of our process, we calculate all the spaces that exist, as well as new spaces that have been requested. We use norms that are part of our industry and what we work with in our, all of our school districts. And essentially, we also look, more importantly, at the efficiencies and how well the existing school is utilized. Are there areas that can be more densely scheduled? Can we capitalize on space that exists in the school before we start spending money on adding spaces? And so we also look at that as part of this overall process, what we call programming. We've always kept an eye on the balance between the three middle schools because they are pretty closely populated. And so we certainly look at the square footages and certainly some of the key core areas and their relative areas. And you can see right now, with the big additions at East Shore, it is slightly ahead, but only 10,000 square feet ahead of West Shore. And you'll see at the end of this process right now, our additions that we're proposing for West Shore are about 10,000 square feet. It was a backhanded way of getting there, but essentially with all the programming and the design iterations we've had, we are pretty much going to be equalizing the three middle schools. And we've never had that chance to be equalized ever since they were started in 1993 when we had to do different priority additions for the three different schools. We've also had to keep our eye on the state grant process. We are charged, the building committee is charged to optimizing the reimbursement process as much as possible, which means 100% if we can, and that means space. The state evaluates these expansion and alteration projects based on how efficiently you use your space. They evaluate that based on the number of square feet per middle school or high school child, and we're always keeping an eye on those calculations. And right now at this time with the 10,000 square feet, we are reasonably within 100% reimbursement at Milford's rate. So we always are keeping an eye on it. After we finish the programming process, we quickly go
to... Can I just say one thing, because I don't want to pass by. You said we're close to the 100% reimbursement. We don't receive 100% of the cost of the project. What Bill meant is 100% of maximizing the reimbursement that we would get.
Right. Right. We go through design iterations, and so we've actually had 10 different design solutions with the program team and the administrators. They've included ones like this where we preserve the gymnasium space, we add stage space at the end of the gym, we've added a music section, we've added offices and classrooms and a fairly large office presence, security, improved PPS staff needs. We've also oriented the entrance differently than its current orientation, straight toward the backside of K Avenue. And part of the expansion program, we looked at the expansion ability back here by the cafeteria. We also looked, and the school staff were very keen at the school's presence to the community. Its visibility from Milford Point and K Avenue, the change in the excitement of the school. And how can that be most effectively done, but efficiently done with the expansion and the renovation program? And that's just not by changing out windows. It's also done in their perception by improving these spaces. Also, bringing a lot of the public functions, the performance functions with all of the parents in the community, bringing that up to the front of the school rather than dragging everybody back through to the rear of the school in the cafeteria where it currently occurs. So the educators were thinking of all those variables that go with planning, and we came up with different solutions. I won't dwell on them, but other ones where we created an entirely new and very large gymnasium space that would support up to 600 people plus staff in a large gymnasium space, exercise rooms adjacent to a stage on one side, and how that would access the vehicular ways. Also then converting the old gym into choral and band. A lot of different iterations, and you can see just a glimpse of them in the red being additions, the darker gray or mauve color as being more significant renovations, heavy renovations in our minds, and then the tan is usually either light to no renovations at all. So you can see how we're touching a lot of the front of the school. We are going to be improving those art classroom areas in this area rather than those large volumes without storage. We're always looking to bring the kiln room and their storage closer to the art rooms, just like we've done at the other middle schools as well. And then even more schemes where we brought art and music over here to the main entrance, and we reoriented the main entrance closer to Milford Point and putting a drop-off canopy pretty much like you've seen at all the schools, Ford, Law, etc. Not so much at Law, but Ford and the other elementary schools. So these were just some of the design iterations that the staff would look at. At about the same time, we were also given some marching orders regarding budget. And so this staff looked at the budget struggles, and you can see on that page 12, or slide 12, some of the priorities that the staff had to look at in terms of bringing the project into a goal that we had been instructed. We were hoping to bring the total project, all costs, all contingencies, in at $16.5 million or less. And so what they did is go through that list that you can see. The black items were ones that were high priorities to them, and you can see they placed a priority on infrastructure improvements, boiler, heating, windows, lighting, things like that that improve the educational environment almost automatically throughout the entire school. And then the green ones for the secondary improvements, which can still fit within the budget. And then those blue items were ones that were teetering and perhaps falling off of the can-do list, depending on how the detailed construction dollars were working. So based on the staff's reprioritization of what they felt their school needed educationally and what was appropriate, we then went back to the drawing board and created a few more design solutions. Here with the stage, but a smaller music area developed as part of it, moving the exercise room in as part of the school, and those blue areas were now being envisioned as second phase, later year improvements or expansions. Not part of the first phase, not part of the initial $16.5 million program. If they had to let something fall off, those were areas that they would let fall out of the original program. Then we finally got to a plan, and you can see how they're always changing. They're with so many different options and iterations, so we don't show you all of them. But to give you a sense, this is the one that the team approved and brought before the building committee in mid-December. and it involves the reusing the existing gymnasium, which was a very tough decision because the gymnasium is so tight. But we're trying to improve it by expanding it out into those old 1949 locker rooms with the cafeteria tables built into the hallway that swing out. It's all the vestiges of the old Pumpkin Delight School, and finally changing it here at this middle school that's been around for 20 plus years. But then developing a new stage complex, a music complex off of the end of that, so they're all interconnected, slightly improving the office area so it's safer, it deals better with the security issues. It hardens the entrance that's required by state law now. And it also looks at improving office spaces as well as making those art classrooms work as part of this budget, putting in or restoring the science lab space. We call it a CLAB, classroom and laboratory together, right off the existing science prep, and then possibly having these other areas that might follow in a later phase. We developed the site plan around that. We always look at site as it's impacted by the footprint of that building, so it's kind of located in that site plan. You know we're cutting off the parking lot that runs around the school completely, therefore we have to either find additional parking spaces there. We've already squeezed a few more spaces over here at K Avenue, and we may even look at some of this flat land at the back of the school for those additional 20 or 30 spaces as we are displacing them up front, and we are finally dealing with the traffic of parent and bus and how they mix or don't mix well at the school, with the buses remaining on that one drive aisle coming off of Mills Road, and then parents entering off of K Avenue and looping and exiting far away from the buses so that you can make that traffic mix and interaction much better. And certainly looking at a more detailed plan, we are looking at finally getting back to that courtyard that we left behind in 1993 as the barren asphalt wasteland that it is, and trying to improve it as the art classrooms will open into that courtyard, much like they do right now over at East Shore Middle School, as well as looking at other minor improvements around the site. Certainly landscaping plan, we're looking perhaps at a very meager budget of planting trees that don't yield too large or too many leaves, but at the same time provide shade on that western exposure where all that new daylighting is going to be introduced as we restore windows. So our landscape architecture looking at improvements to make the spaces obviously more environmentally sensitive and sustainable, as well as doing improvements inside that courtyard and the school's presence on K Avenue. We developed a schematic report, and that is that book on the center table for the building committee. It details all of this part of the process, all the meeting minutes, all the program information, plus all of the engineering and architectural narratives of the various systems that have been preliminarily designed in the schematic report. That bound report essentially contained elevations as simple as they may be, but it gives an idea of scale and scope. It contained many of the more detailed interior furniture layouts that are involved, like this one for the art classroom, and how that new storage room that connects the two art classroom space, or how the kiln room will work for those educators. In this case, I think it's chorus, and then science, the CLABs, restoring that CLAB space. This is chorus, the other one was band. How do we fit all of those kids in that very large band program in that band space? Chorus, either on tiers or not, and then certainly what could that gymnasium space look like as it is fit out with various storage spaces, offices, the exercise room across the hall, visions of that roll-up divider curtain. More detail certainly for the educators. We also, almost as importantly, besides space, is budget. So we developed a more detailed budget, and right now we're advancing at hovering at $16.2 million. So we are tight. It has contingencies in it, so we think it's reasonable. And we also developed renderings at the schematic time in mid-December. We had these images of the front entrance right off of K Street, of the new main entrance, a two-story glass atrium space introducing a lot more glass. These would be the metal panels that define the higher level gymnasium and stage, if you want to call it a gymatorium, so that that mass has a certain appearance or identity from the street and is very clear. We also developed these elevations as you come out of K Avenue toward Milford Point, and that music wing, or the arts wing, and the glass areas, large glass areas that we're going with band and music, and certainly around the corner, with using the same vernacular brick in terms of color and patterning to a degree, not copying it exactly, but respecting the past of the 1950s when it was built. We did receive feedback from the building committee, and I'll go over it quickly, especially as you can see all of that glass right down to the ground, so hold that thought. And so after a month, we came back with revised elevations, and again, this is still a work in progress. This has not been blessed, it is not final, it has room for everybody's feedback. The educators, essentially what we did, responded to the building committee, we moved masonry up so the glass is not as much in contact with the ground. We changed the vernacular a little bit with the design elements of the main entrance, but the main entrance, because by state law, will be both bulletproof and blast resistant. None of the schools yet, I believe, have been fit out to that degree. It's only required by state law when you make additions or expansions over $2 million that you do that. And this school certainly is exceeding that. We've also then changed its appearance as you come out of K Avenue toward Milford Point. We've gotten rid of the curvilinear form, so to speak. We've raised those panels, those metal panels up so that the kids aren't distracted from music out to the play fields or vice versa. Kids looking from the play fields back into the raised areas. And so we've changed it in terms of this is just one potential solution. This is not the final solution. But it gives you an idea of what the educators were looking for. And wow, there's something new at West Shore Middle School, and it's on the face of the school. We also had a meeting where we said we can do better. We've been challenged by the school administrators and the educators to say, well, what can we do that meets your priorities of career-centered learning as well as, student-centered learning and career pathways. And in doing that, what we've done is we've thought of, well, how can we find more efficiencies within the existing school? We will be developing more money that's involved in the student-centered learning inside that very good, well-spaced media center, but it just doesn't meet the current student-centered learning environments that you're looking for. Develop another science lab as part of those career pathways, so that there would be 2 full science labs. Developing computer labs adjacent to the tech ed program, again related to your career pathways program. Moving the general music program back into the existing building and finding those efficiencies of space. Moving those offices, those PPS offices, over perhaps into a converted classroom closer to the main entrances. So as we're developing all these new concepts, et cetera, the floor plan is still in flux. We haven't even brought in anything formal yet to the building committee with this in mind, but we're trying to address all of the input that we're receiving, and so it is still a schematic process. And besides money, there's time. Right now, at the end of January, at the end of December, in the middle of January, we've just finished this pink phase of schematic design. We will be going through design development for the next 2 to 3 months as we finish the schematic design, and hope to finish our construction documents by June or early July. We've got a little hitch in the schedule, but we will be back to you in June or July with the plans and specifications and estimate. It needs your formal blessing, as detailed or as cursory as you want to give it, before we can even take it up to the state for their plan review. And I think that talked about it.
This is for Mr. Silver. This makes my head, this is what always makes my head spin, this, this topic. Not my forte, I will admit. No questions? Mrs. Federico?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What will be the capacity of the gymnasium?
We're still shooting for 600 students plus the 60 staff.
Okay.
Roughly.
And if there were a athletic event going on in the gymnasium, is there going to be room on the sides?
For
like a
visitors?
Yes.
Spectators? Yes.
Yes.
So in this particular scheme, we have carved out of the locker rooms small areas where people can, get relief, even kids coming in and changing classes that aren't right on the gymnasium floor. So they are not truly bleacher size spaces. We're certainly not doing bleachers.
Okay.
But we are carving out areas where you can have spectators, and we're grabbing a little more baseline room over on the other side. And certainly, if you want to put people up on the stage, it's not a high stage at 4, it's a slightly lower stage, so you could have spectators on the stage.
Okay.
It's not intended to be, though, a spectator gymnasium.
Okay. Thank you.
It's phys ed first, is really its purpose.
Okay.
Another question about the gym. It's basically the same gym, right? We're just moving the sidewall out
Encroaching
a little bit
into the locker
hall?
rooms, yes.
Okay. And what is the capacity of that gym right now? No.
In terms of students, it's 2 phys ed classes.
Okay.
But for its maximum capacity, rows of chairs,
Yeah.
it's about the same, 550.
Other questions? Comments? I know for me personally, just philosophically, I know over the years, I've heard my kids participated in athletics, so we would go to other towns and see other schools, and very often it was, would be, if we could only have schools like this. So I think, aesthetically, for me, it's important to have schools that, we can be proud of and that will, within financial means, but that really kind of show that we take a lot of pride in our schools. So I love what I'm seeing. Other comments? Questions? Okay, thank you very much. Then we have just move right into the motion. There's nothing else to present on that. The specifications.
Okay, I make a motion that the Milford Board of Education approves the educational specifications for the expansion, alterations, roof replacement, and hazardous material abatement project at West Shore Middle School, and authorize the superintendent to apply for state reimbursements from the State of Connecticut Department of Administrative Services, Office of School Construction Grants, SCG.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, I'm sorry, roll call vote.
Claire Casey,
Yes.
Michael DeGrego,
Yes.
Suzanne DeBias,
Yes.
Jennifer Federico,
Yes.
Jess Gregory. Jess?
Dr. Gregory?
Yes, I had it on mute because I was coughing, sorry.
Walter Hagedorn,
Yes.
Tom Jagodzinski.
Yes.
Susan Krasinski,
Yes.
Earl Whiskeyman,
Yes.
Susan Glennon.
Yes.
Vote passes unanimously.
Unanimous. Thank you. All right, move on, Dr. Fieser.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a very brief piece of information that we want to share with you under the instructional division highlight, which is the changes to the SAT. And you may be saying, well, why is this so immediate? Because this is the test that our kids are going to be taking as juniors as part of the state standardized test required. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Burt, and he'll introduce.
Thank you, and good evening.
Mrs. Gorman?
Yes.
I'm sorry, not Mrs. Gorman. Do you want to pull up the...
Yep, I'm going to do that right now.
So as we are pulling up the PowerPoint on the screen so that the audience can also view the PowerPoint, again, I just want to reiterate that this is a very brief overview, and primarily because time is pressing. The state-given SAT will be on Wednesday, March 2nd, so we wanted to make sure that we got this information to you ahead of time prior to that. So there's two goals to this presentation. The first is to walk you a little bit in how we got here, that this is now the official state assessment for our juniors. And then the second is a brief overview of some of the changes that take place to the SAT. As you recall, in your board packet, I did provide with two very brief documents, both of which were created for parents for general consumption. So hopefully that gave you some general information. The one excellent part about the SAT move to this new document, to this new assessment, is that they have a tremendous amount of support material on their website. So if there is any specific questions, I would recommend going there first. But if the board does determine that this brief presentation is not enough, and you really want to see some more information, I think we could probably provide a lengthier presentation at a committee of the whole meeting. And I would also recommend we bring in some of our high school folks, because I am by no means an expert on the SAT. So again, a brief overview. So if you go to the second slide there, just a quick history. As you may recall, all of our 10th grade students were tested under the CAPT that included areas writing, reading, mathematics, and science. As some waivers came through for the federal government to change some of the testing, and we knew that the Common Core was coming into play, and the state knew that we needed to change the assessment to match that, they went to the SBA, or the Connecticut SBAC, for 11th grade. It was the decision made to move math and reading to the 11th grade, keeping science in the 10th grade. So with that move, there were some significant concerns from the beginning from most school districts. I was privileged enough to move into the 11th grade assessment committee that was run by the state. I was there the past 18 months, and that was a very large committee, and including students from different districts, principals, teachers, central office administrators, legislators, etc. And it was unanimous at that meeting that the current testing, the SBAC that was coming into play, was not going to be sufficient for our juniors. And so as part of that process, the state then reviewed it, they took it to an advisement, and they said, is there something else that we can look into? In that committee, the recommendation really was to look at the SAT, primarily because it was an assessment that was being taken by a significant portion of our current juniors throughout the state, and that they were had publicized at this time that they were making some changes to their assessment to align to the Common Core. So the committee felt as if this was going to be something that they could move to that would meet the needs of the federal requirements and also meet the needs of the students. Coming out of that committee were some significant testing concerns. First of all, was 11th grade testing was for the SBA, which the first iteration was last spring in 2015.
Those are the smart SBAs.
Sorry, oh, I'm sorry, Smarter Balance Assessment. I live in the world of acronyms. The Smarter Balance Assessment is the new assessment that we're currently giving grades 3 through 8, and in this case 11th grade. The total time on task for 11th graders was 8.5 hours. Now that's significant given some of the other things you want to think about for 11th graders. Majority of high schools have end of course or end of term exams. If you're a trimester, you'll have 3 sets of exams. Your semesters, you probably have midterms and finals, and that takes up significant time. This additional testing will take out more instructional time. Many students take advanced placement tests. That typically the first 2 weeks of May. That takes up, again, more instructional time. And then finally, another consideration is that many students take the SAT already. So given those statistics and that information, the state decided to move to the SAT. One of the big things that they thought about, too, is that in some cases, fees do have play a concern for some students that they don't end up taking the SAT. So they felt that this was going to level the playing field for all students. Now, obviously, not all students apply to college, but eventually, you know, it was decided that this was an opportunity given students that may, perhaps even 2-3 years after college, after graduating high school, that they may apply to a university, a local school, etc. And this would help with the admissions process. So I'm going to move into what the changes are to the SAT. And again, there was greater detail in the document. I just wanted to present some of the highlights. It is now a 3-hour assessment. That's all in during the actual assessment. There's prep time where you have to fill in, remember filling in those bubbles. I don't know if you recall, many of you may have taken the SAT, the old SAT. I remember taking the SAT a couple times. This is not, that old SAT. This is a brand new reformatted SAT. It is still a paper and pencil assessment. To contrast with the SBAC, or the Smarter Balance Assessment, that was an online assessment. This is still a paper and pencil test. The idea is that we're going to focus on a core set of knowledge that they're essential for college and career, as identified by the Common Core and as identified by the College Board. One of the key pieces that they wanted to make sure there was a stronger connection to classroom instruction, including questions of vocabulary in the context of classroom instruction in terms of text and curricula. I know if you read the document, one of the things they want to do is make sure they make connections to science and social studies or the important historical documents in American history. Those will come up. They're not content questions, it's more interpretation questions. So when you're asked about a vocabulary term, you might be reading a portion of the Declaration of Independence and asked about certain context or vocabulary words in context of that document. So it's more about interpretation. It's not the old, you remember yacht is to regatta as, croquet mallet is to whatever, which showed some inherent bias in the old SAT. This is now driven to text-based questions, specifically in the reading and writing analysis piece. They also wanted to make sure that some core instructional information was assessed in the new SAT, and again, if you read the documentation, the heart of algebra was important. This was identified, the skill set under algebra was considered one of the key elements in being prepared for life after high school, and they wanted to make sure that the assessment addressed that and gave us information on that, which is important for us. Another nice piece to this is many of our students take the PSAT, or the PSAT 8 and 9 is available. We actually offered the PSAT to all 10th and 11th graders this year. They took that in October, so that gives us valuable information. The new PSAT is now aligned to the SAT. In other words, they use the same scale score. So if you're at if you're at the scale scores, you'll say you're at 1100 on the PSAT, and then you get 1200 on the SAT. That means you've made progress. Whereas before, you get a score on the PSAT, and we couldn't really show if there was any real growth on the SAT. So this gives us valuable information on our students' development and achievement over time. Yes, sir.
But who paid for the PSAT?
We did. And it is also included in the current proposed budget for next year for 10th and 11th.
And the state pays for the SAT?
Correct. Sorry, and again, the vertical scale gives us important information. We can see student development over time. Finally, the interesting piece here is Khan Academy now offers a free SAT prep course that is available to anybody online. Of course, there are students who still need some hands-on help with that, and not all students can be self-directed online, but it is a nice piece of it. One other piece that I did not put on here that you are, after taking the SAT, you have 4 free reports to send off to colleges after that SAT. Unfortunately, you have only 9 days to ask for that after you receive your scores, but that is a nice feature of this. You don't have to pay for it. If you know, but under normal circumstances, you do have to pay for reports that go off to colleges. So obviously there are some questions remaining, and I don't have answers to these questions. I just wanted to pose them because they're in our minds, as well as many people in the state's minds. So what happens if a student takes the SAT in a previous session? Does that count towards mastery? Let's pretend that it's next year. The state SAT is in March again, the one that's paid for by the state. Well, I took in October and I did particularly well. Do I have to take that again in March because I've hit the mastery score? Which is the next question. We're not sure what the mastery score is yet. We know that on the SBAC, or the Smarter Balance Assessment, that a 3 out of 4 is considered mastery. Well, with a new scale score of 1600 or 800 per assessment, math and reading, is it 500, is it 450, is it 600? We're not sure yet. That has been established by the state. So then another question, when will the scores be reported? We are hopeful that with the SBAC that we'll get scores back sooner than we did, and we're promised by the state that we will. This year we received them in early fall after the assessments closed in May. And again, this assessment is in March, and typically SAT scores are reported out fairly soon, in a few months, but we're not sure if the state's going to take longer to do some of their diagnostics and to set the scale score and the mastery score. So it may take them longer. We're not quite sure, and we don't have that information yet from the state. One other important question, again, kind of going back to the first question, is there's an official makeup day in April. So will other test administration dates count? So in other words, if I miss the makeup day, I've missed the original day on March 2nd, I missed the makeup day on April 27th, can I take it next October, and does that count? So there's some big questions out there. I did go to a state-run information session on the new SAT back in December, and many of these questions were asked by the audience, and the state did not have answers at that time. So I'm sure you have plenty of questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Mr. Min?
Just one quick question. Do they change the actual questions on each SAT each time they issue it, or is it the same test each time?
The question is about, do we have different questions each time? And you can imagine it's given numerous times per year.
Right.
They have a database of questions, and typically what happens is, because it's a secure test, you're not allowed to bring in anything. You have to check in. You have to have a driver's license. Your ID has to match. So it's very big security, and we've been given that information as well for the March 2nd iteration. We have to have specific testing centers. We have to have protocols. The documents come in a secure fashion. We have to make sure that they're in a secure, locked room. They actually do stop in occasionally and check to see if you have them secured properly. If you don't, then you lose your right to give the SAT that day. So in essence, they reuse the questions, but they also introduce new questions all the time to ensure that the questions they're giving are reliable and valid over time.
My thought to that was, if I took the test in October and then I'm scheduled to take it again, I took the test, I know the questions. I'm sure I could do better the second time I take the test with the same questions.
Well, my understanding, there's a database of tens of thousands of questions, so it's
you're
unlikely.
saying they're not the same questions.
However, if you turn to the next 2 pages in the presentation, I'll give you an example of 2 types of questions. Again, a full test is online, available to download. I didn't download that for you. I didn't want you to take it tonight. I don't think there's enough time for you to take a full 3-hour test. But the first one is a reading assessment, and this is just one part. You can see at the top it says questions 12 through 22. This is only the first page. There's numerous pages associated with this, this one passage on dark snow. So the reason I chose this question is because it's not just taking a look at the bottom there where it says number 12 and then it says to as low as 20 degrees, where you then have to go, well, should that phrase remain, or are we going to replace it with B, C, or D, change the phrase there to match the sentence better? You actually have to now interpret some science data here on this graph below for the average daily low temperature in Greenland. So it's not just, again, they're looking for ways of trying real-world application, analysis, and interpretation. It's not just grammar. There are sections where, what sounds better, what fits better. You have to take a look at punctuation. But I chose this one specifically because it's not just the phrasing, it's also some analysis. Same thing with the math on the second page. This is, we actually reviewed this today, and we spent some minutes looking at this in our cabinet meeting, and it was kind of interesting because we were struggling with this, and and you can imagine, and I won't go over this, give you an opportunity to look at this later tonight, or tomorrow morning over coffee, but if you spent, you can notice at the top there's a little calculator symbol. That means you're able to use a calculator on that, but if you spent time trying to go through this and find the mean, the median, the range of that question number 14, and then eliminated one, and that's going to take you a tremendous amount of time. Now, could you do that? Sure, but you probably wouldn't get through a majority of the questions. So what you have to do is have some good knowledge and conceptual knowledge about the concept of mean, median, and range. Because then you're going to have a general idea, okay, well, if I remove one of these things, which one of these is going to be impacted more? If you notice the question, it says, they're all going to be impacted. Which one gets impacted more? So there's some incredible, in a single question like that, there's some incredible depth of knowledge that you have to be able to answer these questions. So you can see a shift in the importance of this document. It really is moving away from memorization of formulas, memorization of obscure vocabulary, moving to things that force you to think in context. So thank you for giving me that opportunity to talk about that. There were some other questions.
Mrs. Krasinski?
Just curious, so when the 11th graders take this test on March 2nd, these scores can be sent to colleges, so they don't have to pay and take the test on March 5th?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, that is one of the frequently asked questions that was in that packet. What if I already signed up for that? I think you have to contact the college board to get your money back if you don't want to take it. And just a separate note as well, the March 2nd iteration is the first time that the new assessment's coming into play. There's one in January coming up. That is the old assessment. The recommendation from the board and from most of our college administrators, high school administrators, is that you should be taking these fall ones, especially if you're a senior, and send those scores. Do not take the one in March to send off to colleges because it's new. There's going to be some alignment, there's going to be some calibration pieces, So again, even with moving our juniors to this, there's going to be some issues, with setting a cut score on that because it's a new assessment, not just for our juniors, but for the entire country. So, we're going to be taking a look at that and waiting for some guidance from the state.
Mr. Jagosinski?
Yeah, I was just curious, in your opinion, is the SAT a better option than SBAC?
That's an excellent question, and I think they both have validity. And again, I've only seen the SBAC once, in true form. For me, I think weighing all the factors, the fact that it's 3 hours, and that it's for our juniors, and realistically, we get the scores back, say, in the summer and the fall. In terms of a diagnostic test to see where our students are, there's very little we can do with those students in the senior year to make adjustments. So to find an assessment that will give us some insights, especially if it's vertically aligned now with a 9th or even a 10th grade assessment, so we can see cohort data, which means the same students moving from 9th to 10th, 11th grade, which we did not have with the Smarter Balance assessment. I think that increases the validity of it, as well as, giving the students an opportunity to take an assessment and maybe encouraging some of our students that aren't considering college to move on to college. And also the shorter time frame, I think, is more appropriate given, the information we get out of it. I don't know if you...
I was going to also say that the one thing, I don't know if you feel this way, that I was surprised at is writing is not being asked. Because writing, whether you go with, the Smarter Balance or you go back to the CAPT, the Connecticut, the 10th grade test, writing was a major piece in that for years and years and years. So I'm not an expert in the SAT, took it how many years ago, but it's just surprising to us. And we don't know if that's an issue of time. I haven't been at a meeting where it's been explained. But that's that's a disappointment from my perspective, that kids are not being asked to write.
Which is something that we would need to take a look at locally and what we're doing to ensure that we're assessing students, because that's a very necessary skill that we want them leaving our district with.
Mrs. Federico?
We'll go right in a row here. Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard about this potential move last year at the CAVE conference, and I was really excited about it. And I think we have a lot of things that we may be a little bit critical of that the state does, but I think overall this is one they got right because it reduces the time spent in testing and it gives students an opportunity to take the SAT that might not otherwise take it, as you explained earlier. The writing piece was one of my questions, so you've just answered, and I was going to ask, if there is something we can do locally to make up for that. Obviously, students will be taking all of their normal assessments that they would take in their LA classes, but perhaps there's something additional that can be done. And I do have a few other questions just related to Milford Public Schools and our practices. So does everyone take the PSAT? Is that offered to everyone in 10th, 11th?
Again, we paid for it. It's a minimal cost, a very few dollars per student for the benefit that we get from it. And yes, I believe every 10th and 11th grader took it in October this year.
Okay. So they get the PSAT October 10th grade, October 11th grade, and then the SAT March 11th grade.
Which is exciting, again, because of the correlation now to the SAT, so it gives us some insight and maybe, in both into our curriculum, our instruction, our assessment practices, as well as this particular assessment.
Yeah, and I think it helps prepare them for the SAT, right? Might we think about, or do we already offer any SAT prep?
We don't offer formally as part of our curriculum. There certainly are organizations within town that do that, and there are, now, there's pieces that you go online with. We are concerned, however. We're somewhat concerned. I think the cities, I know I've heard my colleagues in the cities who are extremely concerned because there's clearly inequity. So I worked in, a very wealthy community in Connecticut, and it was just a given. Everybody took SAT prep. Everybody did, and could afford it. And now it's great to know that there's, the Khan Academy is offering something, but you also have a percentage of kids. We would have few, but there are percentages of kids in the state, they don't have access to computers in their homes. You know, so that is one concern about how do you take into consideration the fact that there are some who will be far more prepared for the SAT than other students will. One of my colleagues asked the question of the commissioner, is the state going to provide SAT prep in the cities for kids? Because the cities can't afford it. They can't afford to hire the staff to come in and do the SAT prep.
Right, and that's why I asked the question here, because there will certainly be, you know, we have a wide range of families on the socioeconomic scale, so there will be families who can afford the prep and there will be families who cannot.
If I may interject, again, looking at the depth of knowledge associated with some of these questions, and again, you can go and look at the number of questions. I'm not quite sure what an SAT prep class can do. You know, I had an SAT prep book when I took my SATs, and it was a lot of obscure vocabulary. You're learning Latin roots and all that other good stuff, and different strategies on how to eliminate, you know, A, B, C, or get down to one. This is really incredibly deep thinking that has to be learned over time, that has to be core to our instruction. You know, this is really more of, are we starting in 3rd grade with good readers? This isn't about, you know, doing a 5-week prep course for the SAT. I think that was much more, I think the previous assessment or the current one, the current iteration of the SAT is more easily influenced by that kind of prep. I think this shift to more in-depth thinking is really about good instruction over time.
Okay.
I do think, which I'm not arguing with you, but I do think, however, some of the prep would just simply be to help kids understand what kind of a test this is. So you just gave the example of that kids could use the calculator. But if they spend so much time trying to determine, okay, the mean, the median, et cetera, and so helping kids to understand, wait a minute, how do you use your time? You know, how do you make an educated guess on a question? I think that those kinds of skills would be really helpful to a lot of kids. But I hear what you're saying, it's a very different kind of test.
I guess one thing is, to wrap it up, I'd like to see us do anything we can to level the playing field.
Sure.
You know, no matter where you live in Milford. And my last really quick question is, what happens to the CMT for science? Does that continue?
It continues.
Okay.
And the cap for the 10th grade.
Science. 10th grade.
So 10th graders will be taking the
10th grade, okay.
Yeah, and grades 5 and 8.
Okay.
Questions down here, Ms. Grego?
I just want to make 2 comments, one to Dr. Burtz and one to Dr. Fieser. I want to concur with Dr. Burtz about the security. As a former proctor for SATs, I know the process when a student enters the school, how the security is checked with the license and so forth. And in addition, I volunteered because it was hard to find a proctor that was willing to do the special ed children because they didn't have a time frame. So you had less children in the class, but I was there from like 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon without ever leaving a breach of security. It was constant monitoring for that test, and you gave those children as much time as they needed. You didn't leave the room unless you got relieved, and you stayed until the last child left. So I understand the security part, what you're talking about. And Dr. Fieser, you talked about writing. When I took the, it was called the Language Arts and Scholastic Test to be a certified teacher in New York, there were 5 parts you had to pick, you needed to pass. But there was also a writing exam. It was a 4-paragraph essay question. And I used to teach for 4 years English, creative writing to the seniors, and I knew what English was about. Yet I still had to go online to learn a term they call scaffolding that I was a little lax in once, because if you failed the writing part, you fail the whole test. So once I learned how to scaffold, I learned how to answer the essay questions, 4 paragraphs, the way the state wanted you to answer it. Because if you fail that, you fail the whole test. So that's equally important. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Mr. Jagosinski?
Given the complexity of the test, how do special needs students deal with this?
That is actually something we're still working through with the state in terms of accommodations. For the majority of students with special needs, we're able to do specific accommodations based on their individual educational plan. There's this very small percentage, 1.5% of our students that do not take this assessment. They'll take an alternative assessment that's given over the course of time by our staff.
But you raise a really good point. I mean, most educators would say that 1.5% of your special ed students being permitted to be excluded is insufficient. So we have, I mean, we look at this and you know, any one of us might react to this. So you would imagine, you know, that there are students who might be, you know, in the 11th grade, but with respect to their reading ability, cognitive ability, et cetera, really cannot handle this kind of a question, and yet the expectation is the kids are going to sit and take the exam. Sue, you want to talk further? I mean, you deal with this all the time.
Yeah, it definitely is a frustrating requirement that has been placed on all students. We certainly want them to take the assessments, and some can do very well with the assessments, but others are already experiencing anxiety. And when they're placed in a situation where their reading level is not up to par, the anxiety just skyrockets, and they're still expected to perform. And it is quite a challenge. You know, it takes a lot of prep of the students and deep breathing, but many of them do well, and others really struggle.
Any other questions on this side? Any more over here? All set? Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is the quarterly budget report. Mr. Riccatelli.
Thank you, and in your package you have the quarterly budget report for up through December 31st of 15, which of course is the halfway point in our budget year. I'm sure that in the legal briefing that you had from Attorney Dugas, he probably pointed out to you that probably one of your more major responsibilities is that your budget, Milford Board of Education budget, cannot run a deficit, or you're held personally responsible under the law. And so it's our job to make sure that you guys are safe and we won't get you into trouble. So, you know, by the board's policies and procedures, we bring the report to you on a quarterly basis. But I assure you that we are looking at the budget on a weekly basis, and this time when we're really looking at the budget, we're looking at it on a daily basis to make sure that there's no potential problems. If we see potential problems, we can react to it quickly and take measures so that we are in good, sound financial shape. I can assure you at this time, we've done that careful analysis, and we do not see any major problems at this time. We see a couple of things that we're watching, and of course one was pointed out to you earlier, and that is to do with the natural gas. In this 15-16 budget, we did not budget enough money, as Dr. Fieser said, and being fully transparent. That was an error. We got one email from the city telling us what the new cost of the natural gas would be for the new contract year, which was 29.4% higher than the year before. And quite honestly, that calculation was not put into the budget calculation when we put the 15-16 budget together. So we knew right off the bat that we were going to have a problem in natural gas. And as you can see from the report, we expect by the end of the year that we'll be in a deficit of about $94,000. Yes, it's on page 2 of the report, and it's account 4101, heat, energy, gas. And we are also, in the Board of Education budget, we're always looking at areas, if we're going to have a shortfall, where are we going to be able to cover that from? And we've identified there are going to be surpluses, we believe, we anticipate, we project, in the electricity account, account 4100. We believe that there'll be a small surplus in the water account. We try to stay within the same series, so in those 4,000 series, that's where we identify that we can free up some money. And then also in the gasoline account, which is account 5107, we are projecting that we will have a sizable surplus in that account. And so we use those accounts to cover the deficit that we're seeing in the natural gas account. Normally, you would not see it transfer during the year. We would come to you, traditionally we come to you in June, and then for a budget transfer where we need to transfer funds to, and then the final budget closeout comes to you in July, and whatever transfers are needed, you get them at that time. But most of the other accounts, we are where we would expect to be. All of the dollars that are in, all of the dollar amounts are either expended to date or encumbered to date. You can see in all of the salary accounts, all of the 1000s accounts, we've encumbered everything that we believe we will need through the end of the year. In other accounts where actual purchases are made or projects need to be completed, if they have not been spent yet, you're still seeing available balances. And so I also point out to you that from the first quarter on, we're always in deficit in accounts 5101, 5102, 5103, 5109, and 5600 and 5601. Those are all special ed, either transportation or tuition, and they are mostly reimbursed by the excess cost grant from the state. At the end of the year, we submit to the city. The excess cost grant, and this was one of the board questions, and we'll explain it a little bit further if it requires further explanation, but the excess cost grant dollars go to the city. But by law, they are required, the city is required to reimburse us for any deficit that we have that needs to be covered. Some years, the city actually makes out, and there's a revenue amount in the budget over and above what they give us, and that's counted as city revenue. It's right in the city's budget. There are other years where the city doesn't make out, it's zero. And there's some years that we're able to cover a certain portion of that deficit in those accounts. But you'll see them in deficit, you'll see the deficits grow over time, and then throughout the year we send those numbers to the state, and the city gets reimbursed, and we go through that process. So we're not concerned about the deficits in those accounts, and you shouldn't be either. I think that's really all I want to point out with regard to the numbers. You can see it. And again, the bottom line on everything is that no major areas of concern that we can't cover, and we project that we will have a balanced budget at the end of the year. And I'll answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Jagodzinski?
2 questions. The encumbered amount, do we have to cut a check by June 30th?
No.
Okay, so that can carry in.
It can carry over for a specific item, and one of those things, just as an example, would be if we are planning to do, if we're planning to install a generator at one of the schools. Right. Over the summer.
Right.
The money can be, as long as we have a purchase order from a vendor, those dollars can be encumbered. Okay. and then held. Normally we don't go past one fiscal year, but in some cases we do.
The other thing that catches my eye is how close the salaries are to the budgeted amount. And typically, because turnover, it's rare in other budgets that I've seen to be so close.
Yep. And I can explain, and you were at a lot of the meetings that we talked about this, but we had two, and I'll call them anomaly years, where in the 13-14 year, we had a tremendous amount of retirements. We normally budget for the average, which is 18.
Right.
That year we had 28, which caused a ripple effect in the 14-15 budget, and you saw a tremendous surplus. We don't anticipate that that's going to be the case this year.
Right.
And we're actually making up for the in this budget, we're making up for we expect that we'll have higher costs for, let me get this right. We're making up for the retirement costs or the severance costs from last year in this budget.
Right, okay.
That's why you don't see it. We expect this year to be much closer toward the end of the year with regard to wages.
Just one other comment. Are we also seeing the 5.1 additional teachers that we heard about in the budget?
Yes, those are also budgeted
That's
in there.
in here.
However, that's not impacting us in a real tremendous way. And we'll get into this more when we talk about the budget. When we're budgeting for a teacher, there's, as you can see in your budget package, there's wide ranges depending on where a teacher is on step and grade. And but we have to pick a number for the budget, and we look at all of our salaries and we come up with a figure. This year the figure that we're using is $62,500, which is the typical salary for a teacher. It's not the average, it's not the mean, it's what we would consider to be typical. And that's how we budget for those teachers. But the 5.1 teachers didn't come in at 62.5. They're younger teachers, they're newer teachers because they're just hired. So in most cases they came in under that 62.5, and so it wouldn't be affecting the budget like you would normally expect it to be affected by.
Yes, Mr. Jagodzinski.
Did the board approve the additional headcount, or was it assumed because it fit within the monetary amount that it was approved?
Yes, the board, formal vote never came to the board. We have a dollar amount, and again, when we get to the budget next week, we'll talk about it further. But we have a dollar amount, and within that, well, we'll just use teachers right now, but it really could be any. There's movement every day. Literally, there could be movement, maybe not every day, but if a teacher goes out on maternity leave, that dollar amount changes.
Right.
If you know, for any number of reasons, and so it's always a moving target. And so the way that we look at it is there's a dollar amount, there's an FTE count, and then where the dollars and that FTE is shifted within is pretty much left up to administration to decide where the needs are. And that's where where it was with the 5.1. Student needs dictated that.
Right.
That's what we needed the money for.
Yeah, the board, we have our class size guidelines that we direct them to stay within, and while we do have to approve new positions, the teacher is already a position, so they're directed to do what they need to do to keep within appropriate class size guidelines. And in the case of the specialists, sometimes it's a question of, you know, if you have one more classroom, it throws off your, you know, you need a tiny bit more of a gym teacher or whatever to accommodate all of the classes, right? So,
which is what happened with the elementary specialists, the 1.2 phys ed and music. Those literally, which is in one of the questions that one of you asked, we didn't really hire an outside person.
Right.
We took several teachers who were not full-time, like somebody who's a 0.8, and we added 0.2 to make them. But it added up to 1.2 specialists.
Other questions on the quarterly budget report?
I do have a question.
Yes, Dr. Gregory.
My question is, and it's difficult, I'm not incredibly auditory, but is it possible that the city might reimburse some of the money they got back from the state to help cover the snafu that happened with the natural gas?
No.
That was a resounding no.
Yeah, I heard it.
No, once the city sets the board's budget, that's the board's budget. And quite honestly, we're expected to cover that. You know, within our line items, just like in the city's budget, there's budgeting is not an exact science. You're going to have some accounts where you're going to have a surplus, and you're going to have some accounts where there's a deficit. But at the end, it has to come out equal, and we're expected to make sure that it comes out equal. So, no, the
Right,
city,
but some money gets funneled to the city through that little loophole where the transportation stuff gets passed to the city, not the Board of Ed.
right, and that's all dictated. Where the grant monies go is all dictated by state law, and most of the time it goes to the city to help offset the costs that the city pays for education. And this was another board question, that in ECS funding and transportation grant, we roughly get $11.5 million back from the state that goes to the city. But the city actually contributes, and the taxpayers actually contribute with all costs in, with the board's operating budget and those other costs that are on the city side of the budget, about $117 million. So it barely, I mean, no, I'm not going to say it barely reimburses, but it's a small percentage that goes to the city that helps offset some of the costs, but not many of the costs.
The error was our fault on our end, correct? I mean, we erred in
Yes.
terms of not carrying over we were informed of the increase by the city.
Correct.
So the
Oh,
mistake
yes,
was on
yes.
our end.
Yep.
We're fessing up, right?
Correct. Yeah, yes, that's what happened.
Okay. Other questions? Any other questions, Dr. Gregory?
No, I was just looking for a way to fix that.
Yep. Any other questions on the quarterly budget report? Okay, is that it, Mr. Ricitelli?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And our final report is our human resources report. Mrs. Capazza?
Thank you. In your packet, you have the current listing, my monthly report, which has the current job postings as well as all the personnel changes for the month. I did want to point out, as far as retirements go, I'll try to give you a running tally between now and the end of June, but so far we have processed 6 retirements for the end of the school year, meaning the end of June. We also have had 3 mid-year retirements, so for a total of 9, if you will. 3 that already happened, 6 that will happen at the end of June. So I'll try to keep a running tally on that to let you know how close we are to the average of 18.
Questions on the report? I had one question. What is an administrative substitute under personal recommendations?
Administrative substitute is a substitute for
an administrator?
Yeah, we have currently a substitute. I think it's the one over at Ford High School. Yes. Yeah. Dr. Gillespie gave birth to twins recently.
Oh, wow! I didn't know that.
Congratulate her. And we had to go to the outside to find somebody.
Okay.
To do that.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So Dr. Fieser, thank you very much. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Just for Mr. Hagedorn, just to explain our consent agenda, it's a grouping of items that we typically don't have discussion on. They're pretty clear cut, so we just vote on them in a block. But if there's ever anything on the consent agenda list that you do want to have discussion on, you just need to ask for, at the beginning of the meeting, to have it removed. So not that you can't talk about it, they just typically don't have any discussion. So it allows us to just make the approval in a block. It's a little time saver. Okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. So a motion for the consent agenda, Mrs. Tobias?
Okay, I make a motion that the Milford Board of Education approves the consent agenda items 1, 2A, and 3. Number 1, the disbursement report. Number 2, consideration of minutes from the December 14th, 2015 business meeting. And 3, acceptance of hazardous material abatement Phase 5 project at Joseph A. Foreign High School as complete. State project number 084-0189 CV.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bias. All in, roll call vote?
Claire Casey,
Yes.
Michael DeGrego,
Yes.
Suzanne DeBias,
Yes.
Jennifer Federico,
Yes.
Jess Gregory,
Yes.
Walter Hagedorn,
Yes.
Tom Jagosinski,
Yes.
Susan Krasinski,
Yes.
Earl Whiskeyman,
Yes.
and Susan Glennon.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we didn't have any new business on tonight's agenda, so we'll move on to board comment. Mr. Jagosinski?
Yeah, as Dr. Pierce, that's amazing. As Dr. Fieser let everybody know, I had a concerned parent that contacted me. And she was confused about the standards-based report card. She went to a document that the school had provided, and she didn't find it very helpful. She eventually got her questions answered. But Dr. Fieser also provided everybody with the document that had been sent with the report card and a copy of one of the report cards. And I did take a look through those. And basically, one of the things that the document said is the report card should allow parents to understand more clearly what's expected. And taking a look at the report card itself, some of the terms that parents are expected to understand, an average parent, are things like generalized place value understanding for multi-digit whole numbers, fluently adds multi-digit numbers using the standard algorithm, uses appropriate tools strategically, attends to precision. And I just think it's unreasonable for us to expect an average parent to read this type of information and make any sense of it. I really think that we need to take a look at the report card, and it needs to be, restructured in a way where the descriptions are meaningful to an average parent. I just think this is too bureaucratic. Okay?
Any other board comment?
Actually, could I comment on that?
If you'd like.
I would. I really appreciate that you're saying that. When you read them out loud, they do sound like edge-speak, and I think that it might be nice to have a more plain language description for each item, because having it broke down into the standards is wonderful, but I think I really agree with you that the language is very education specific.
Any other comments? Mr. Bias?
I just want to thank Pam for getting the bus trip together again. I try to go every year when we take the seniors to the winter concert, and Pam puts it together. She makes cookies, she brings stuff for the seniors. Dr. Fieser, this year Claire went, and we all had fun again, and thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Whiskeyman.
Just in general, an observation. I have a grandson who never learned how to write script. They stopped teaching it. He can't sign his name. He can't sign his name. Now he's 13 years old. Now, it seems to me that we shouldn't abandon the writing of script. If for no other reason than for legal reasons, that you have to sign your name to many documents, and that's not going to stop. So I would appreciate us at least looking at the process of having a minimal script educational component in our curriculum so that everyone can sign their name and not have to make an X. I don't think it's too much to ask to be able to read script, not only from the standpoint of all the historical documents written in script, which aren't going away, including our Constitution, and the ability to sign your name to understand how to read script. So that's my, and that's just my personal experience with that. That's why I bring it up. So just a thought. Thank you.
I've heard the same sentiment from lots of people. So, Mr. DeGrego?
Last month I said I went to Law High School and we did fingerprinting, and then just before Christmas I get a priority package in the mail, and inside were over 4 dozen letters from the seniors from Miss Mannion's class thanking me for coming in and demonstrating that. And they all asked if I would come in again before the semester ends. So through Dr. Fieser, Mr. Thompson, I'm again going back to law tomorrow morning to do ballistics and gathering evidence. So I look forward to that very much. And I thank Dr. Fieser for allowing me to go, and Mr. Thompson. And we may get a special guest. We may get Sue DeBias to come in. She expressed an interest. Thank you very much.
You're very generous with your time, Mr. DeGrego.
Thank you.
So that's
I
great.
enjoy it so much.
Any other board comment? Seeing none? Take a motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second. Roll call vote.
Claire Casey?
Yes.
Michael DeGrego?
Yes.
Suzanne DeVias?
Yes.
Jennifer Federico?
Yes.
Jess Gregory?
Yes.
Walter Hagedorn?
Yes.
Tom Jagodzinski?
Yes.
Susan Krasinski?
Yes.
Earl Whiskeyman?
Yes.
Susan Glenn?
Yes. We are adjourned. Thank you. We'll see everybody on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Except for Hagedorn at 6. Where you meet? In the green room. So 6 o'clock on Wednesday for adjournment?
Yes. Yep.
In Dr.